broadcasting from the Community Service Radio Studio at the Pop Music Academy in Sellersburg, Indiana. Welcome to Dangerous Subversive Radio. Prepare to open your mind and question everything. Good evening, and welcome to yet another episode of Dangerous Subversive Radio. I'm your host, Tim Ritalik, and tonight's episode is brought to you by the man behind the curtain, master engineer and producer Jackie Smith.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. True story. A young woman doctor sets up a new practice in a small western town, only to find that practically in no time, a portion of that town is about to turn into a mob of villagers with torches and pitchforks and tar and feather her and run her out of town on a rail. Why? Well, it's because she was a pediatrician. I mean, we shouldn't have just run her out of town. We should have put her in jail. I mean, she had the damn gall to put a sign up outside her office with her name and write under it the word pediatrician. I mean, what did she think, that we were just going to bring our children to her? Well, that's usually the way it works. Well, you must be one of them pediatricians too. Well, not really, but wait a minute. What do you think a pediatrician is? You know, pediatrician. One of those people who likes to molest children. Now, you see, that's what can happen when people are working with inaccurate definitions. And it has occurred to me that I have never really heard anyone come out and explain from the beginning what conservatism is and what conservatives stand for. And a lot of liberals will tell you, well, that's easy. Conservatives hate poor people, they hate black people, they hate gay people, they hate women, they hate the environment, and they want them all to die so that they can have more money. Well, let's look at that. Poor people, black people, gay people, women. How do you explain that there are conservatives in every one of those groups? Especially women. Now let's look at women. All conservatives have a mother. Most of them have sisters, daughters, and roughly half of all conservatives are women. Do they hate themselves? And did they decide to become conservatives because they hated themselves? Or did they decide that since they had become conservatives, they needed to start hating themselves? You know, that's the question you have to answer. Yes, they want they want people to die. That's why they want to take away their health care, so they'll die. That's the way why they want to take away their Social Security and take everything they have and throw them out on the street so they'll die. Well, let me tell you something. No one has as their primary motivation people dying. Joseph Stalin didn't even have that as his primary motivation. Mr. Stalin, what is the main thing you'd like to do? Well, first of all, I'd like people to die. Then I'd like to build a better world. No, he thought he was trying to build a better world. It's just that 27 million people dying was the price he was willing to pay for building a better world. Now, if you truly believe that the main thing that motivates conservatives is people dying, you are no longer part of this conversation. Run along. But if you still happen to be listening, tonight I'm going to tell you what conservatism is about. I'm going to tell you what conservatives really stand for. Oh, so now you're qualified to speak for all conservatives? You're qualified to define conservatism for everybody else? Yes, Yes, I am. And here we go. Conservatism is built upon the belief that there are three things that all people want. And they want these things down to the very core of their being. And they want them roughly in this order. And those things are freedom, prosperity, and peace. Okay, well, let's look at the first one, freedom. Government, well, first of all, I have to say, you take these three things, freedom, prosperity, and peace. Government is not the path to any of these things, especially not the first. Government is actually the opposite of freedom. If you look at the definition of the word govern, to conduct the policy, action, and affairs of a state, organization, or people. Next definition, to control, influence, or regulate a person, action, or course of events. That is what's happening in a prison or on a plantation. These are extreme examples of government, so they are included in this definition. Government is the opposite of freedom. Any law is an infringement of someone's freedom. Now, you may say freedom really isn't all that important. Okay, let's put you in a prison for a week and see how important freedom becomes to you. Better yet, let's put you in a mental hospital for 2 days and see how important your freedom is to you. Have you ever called in sick when there was nothing really wrong with you? If a little scrap of freedom was for just a few hours more important than your livelihood, tell me how unimportant freedom is to you. Now, you may say, we haven't really lost any freedoms. Oh, really? Okay. What do you think makes you free? The fact that you got up this morning, went to work, after work went to the grocery store, went home, cooked dinner, watched a little TV, and went to bed. Is that what makes you free? Because I can guarantee you that the vast majority of people in Cuba or China or Burma or North Korea did the exact same thing you did today. Now, are you going to insist that people in North Korea are as free as you are? People in North Korea are required by law to cry at state funerals. There are 14 different government-approved hairstyles in North Korea. Having your hair cut any other way can land you in prison. Not crying at a state funeral gets you 14 months in prison in North Korea. With rare, very rare exceptions, government never does anything without taking away a little bit more of your freedom and imposing a little more control over your life. Now, I said with rare exceptions. Do you know where most of those exceptions are? I'll give you a little hint. That's right. Okay, body count check. Okay, how many people have I talked about dying so far? How many people have I said I want dead so far? I think the answer is 0. Okay, on to the next word. The next thing people want, prosperity. What is prosperity? Prosperity is the promise of things being better tomorrow than they are today. And it's the promise that you can make them that way. Don't we all want our kids to have a better life than we had? I know I would certainly like my life to be better tomorrow than it is today or next year. I'm not going to tell you all my tales of woe, but just like everybody else, I have them. And I'd like things to be better. Now, it's no surprise, no secret that conservatives do not like socialism. And I can tell you why right now. Under socialism, you will never have any more prosperity than the government decides to allow you to have. I personally know a woman who was many years ago, for a short time, on public assistance. If she did anything to make her situation better, anytime she earned an extra dollar, they would take away $1 of her public assistance. If she earned an extra $100 a month, they would decrease it by $100 a month. Now, what is that but keeping her down? Okay. And you know what? If you have all the prosperity you want, if you're happy with your level of prosperity, you're one of the ones that the government will eventually take down a peg or two. They'll take some of your prosperity and redistribute it to others, lowering your quality of life. Socialism, they want to sell it to you by saying it fills in the valleys. It doesn't. It chops off the mountains. And here's the thing. There aren't nearly as many mountains as you think there are. And they're not nearly as high as you think there are. There are not nearly as many rich people as some people would have you believe. And they don't have as much money as you think. Bernie Sanders would like you to get outraged at the fact that 1% of the people have more wealth than the other 99%. Well, the math works out that if you took all of that 1%'s wealth and redistributed it among everyone, he would like to make you think that now everyone's going to be as rich as that rich person. That's not what's going to happen. Everybody is going to be nearly as poor as the poorest person. Everyone. It's the same way with the entire world. If you have all the first world nations confiscate all their wealth and distribute it among all the third world nations, progressives would have you believe that now you're going to have an entire planet full of first world nations. And it's going to be the opposite. You're going to have an entire planet full of third world countries. And who's going to help them then? If they could help themselves, if they could lift themselves up, they would have done it centuries ago. But you insist they need help. Who's around to help them now? When you've taken an entire planet and turned it into a third world country, where's the money going to come from to help them? This is what Margaret Thatcher meant when she said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So the amazing thing is that if you give people freedom, they will make their own prosperity. One of my favorite quotes is from John Stossel, who says, if you leave people alone, they will solve most of their own problems. And as soon as they're done solving their own problems, you know what they're going to do? They're going to start solving other people's problems. People have a built-in drive to create prosperity. If they didn't, we would have all been extinct long ago. The first caveman who covered himself in animal skins was more prosperous than he was before he did that. If he had no drive to do that, he would have starved or frozen to death, and guess what? No more cavemen. The people who invented the wheel were more prosperous after they invented it than before. If they had no drive to do that, we'd still be dragging things around behind us. If you take a society and you give it two things, freedom and a monetary exchange system, wait a couple years, guess what you'll have? You will have a capitalist economy. And those two things, it is inevitable. Put those together, capitalism spontaneously springs into being. Socialism, on the other hand, has to be imposed upon people by a government at the expense of their freedom. Which one creates prosperity? Socialism or capitalism? Have you ever wondered, when you go to buy something at the store, have you ever wondered why you both say thank you? It's because they had a product. Let's call it tacos. They have the tacos, you're hungry. On the other hand, you've got the money, they've got the tacos. Why do you both say thank you? Because by this mutually beneficial, voluntary transaction, both of you have prospered. Time for a new slide. Capitalism, like I said, rises spontaneously. Socialism must be imposed upon those with less power by those who have more. Let me ask you, and really think about this. If socialism really is superior, a superior form of government, why do you have to impose it upon people? If socialism is the surest path to prosperity and people have a built-in drive for prosperity, why do you have to fight for it? Why must people be coerced into it? If democratic socialism were really all that great, then why wasn't it democratically voted in 240 years ago? Two possible answers. Nobody ever thought of it before. Oh, my gosh, democratic socialism, what a concept! Or that it's the same old redistribution of wealth that free people have been saying no thank you to for 2 centuries, repackaged so that maybe this time you'll buy it. Which of those two do you think is more likely? And if you advocate democracy, then that means that 51%, at least a majority of the people, have been turning socialism down for 2 centuries now. So if you really believe in democracy, and your democratic socialism is democratically voted out of existence, what are you going to do then? Are you going to accept it? And if you're going to impose it anyway, was it ever really democratic in the first place? Time for another body count check. What's the body count so far, Jackie?
You tell me.
Yes, 0. How many people have I talked about dying? None. Okay, let's move on. Peace. Is government the surest path to peace? When was the last time you saw a private citizen lead a country into war? Now, I happen to believe that there are just wars. And why are just wars fought? Usually to gain or regain someone's freedom. People sign up to fight those wars. People will fight and die for freedom. People will fight and die for other people's freedom. And even if you think they're unjust wars, and actually I happen to believe they're unjust wars, even if you're going to tell me, well, we just went to war for their oil. Oh, really? Then why don't we have their oil? If we went to war for their oil and we won, why do they still have it? But even if it is an unjust war, it was the government that led us into it. Now, I have to counterbalance this by saying that no matter how small you make a government, if you strip it down to its very last responsibility, that responsibility is to protect the lives of its citizens. All of its citizens. Hold that thought. We'll talk about it later. But when you talk about peace, you're not just talking about the peace, the absence of war. You're talking about peace of mind also. How do you give a population peace of mind? Well, guess what? Freedom plus prosperity plus the absence of war pretty much results in peace of mind every single time. Okay, we've talked about peace. One more body count check. How many people have I talked about wanting to die?
0.
There you go. Okay. The next principle that conservatism is built on is the fact that government is the most expensive, least efficient, least effective, most intrusive, not to mention the slowest way to get anything done. Now, if I say it's the most expensive, that means there's a less expensive way. If I say it's the least efficient, that means there's a more efficient way to do things. If I say it's least effective, most intrusive, that means there's a more effective way to do it and a less intrusive way to do it. And when I say it's the slowest way to get anything done, that means there's a faster way. So I've just told you about 5 different kinds of a better way to do it. The fact is, conservatives want the same things for people that you want. We want people to have health care. We want people to have enough food to eat. We want people to have a roof over their heads. We want minorities to be treated fairly. Not traded, treated fairly. We want everyone to have freedom and prosperity and peace. We just don't want it done by the one method that grinds off a little piece of our freedom and limits our prosperity a little more every single time it acts. And when I say our freedom, it's because it grinds off a little bit of your freedom too. And if you don't see that, it's because you just didn't happen to be using that particular freedom at the time it was ground off. And if you think the government is giving you prosperity, that's because you have not yet reached the prosperity limit that they've set for you. I'd like to go into a few things that liberals and conservatives actually have in common. But first, I'd like to guide you through a couple of thought experiments, and the purpose of these, the objective of these, is identifying what is really the common. I mean, the problem. First example, the 98-pound weakling. He has been getting beat up and having his lunch money stolen since he was in kindergarten. And now he's in high school. But things have changed now because he's hired himself a bodyguard. Now he's doing the beating up. He's taking the lunch money. Everybody's, including yours. So what's the problem? The 98-pound weakling, right? Wrong. If he was the problem, you would have been getting beat up and getting your lunch money stolen for the last 11 years. What changed? The bodyguard. So what is the problem? The 98-pound weakling or the bodyguard? Another example. Your neighbor has a vicious dog. Every morning for the last 10 years, when you've come out of your house and gotten into your car, he has been snarling and growling and trying to jump over the fence. And you know that he wants to tear you to pieces. But you've gotten used to him. You've gotten so you hardly even notice him anymore. Until one day when just as you're coming out of your house, a 98-pound weakling opens the gate and lets the dog out. And you get mauled and wind up in the hospital. What's the problem? Well, the dog, of course, right? If the dog was the problem, you would have been getting mauled every morning for the last 10 years. What has changed? The 98-pound weakling. Now, even in a double-blind controlled experiment, if you change one factor and get a different result in Group A or Group B and not in the control group, it is determined that that factor was the cause of the different result. Only one factor has changed here. That's the addition of the 98-pound weakling. He is the problem, not the dog. Now, this next example is going to kind of be a transition from these theoretical examples, which came out of my brain, to some real-world examples. And with your permission, I'm going to read this one to you because there's no way I could memorize all this. Thousands of years ago...
Tim?
Yes?
Permission granted.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thousands of years ago, the only way you could have light after sundown was by sitting around a communal fire. The invention of candles changed all that. They allowed you to harness light around a small object and go off on your own and have your own private space. Candles gave people independence at night. They gave people more freedom. They created new circles of civilization. You could choose your associations because you were no longer required to gather around the big fire. As time went on, people found other uses for candles. They were used as clocks, for instance. Small screws were driven into them at regular intervals, and as the candle burned down, the screw fell down onto the metal dish the candle was sitting on, telling you that another hour had passed. Eventually, candles became status symbols. In the 13th century, a candle guild was formed in Europe. Professional chandlers, which is what candle makers were called, went door to door in England collecting kitchen fat to make candles. They were very successful, and they opened up candle shops all over England. Then, in 1709, the Candle Guild persuaded Parliament to pass a law banning at-home candle making, giving the Candle Guild a monopoly. The price of candles skyrocketed until only the well-to-do could afford them. And that's how they became status symbols. And that, of course, is the story of how the evil greed of chandlers made candles so expensive that the poor could not afford them. Right? If the chandlers were the problem, then the problem would have existed as long as chandlers had existed. But for centuries, candles were so cheap that anyone could afford them, until the year that Parliament stepped in, until the government decided to give the chandlers a monopoly. Now, let's look at a couple of real-world examples. Health insurance. As soon as the Affordable Care Act was passed, insurance companies started raising their rates when there was no legitimate reason for that to happen. Guess what? Conservatives agree with you. We have to buy that insurance too. Now, it's true that the insurance companies were required to pack your policy with all kinds of stuff that you'd never need. But, you know, when they're providing pregnancy coverage for a man, they're never going to have to pay out on that. And yet, they raise their rates anyway. So it costs them nothing, and they still charge more for it. But here's the thing. Insurance companies have been around in one form or another for hundreds of years. If their greed was the problem, then the problem would have been around for hundreds of years. It was only after the government decided to force you to buy their product that they decided to raise the rates. So what is the problem? The insurance companies or the government? Let's talk about corporate welfare. Huge corporations owning your congressman, giving him tax breaks and loopholes and subsidies, and in some cases, literally writing the laws and handing them over to your congressman to take up to the Hill. We don't like that either. Conservatives agree with you. But do you think they just walked into Congress and demanded it? You think they just walked in and said, well, we're rich, so this is the way it's going to be. You're going to give us subsidies and tax breaks, okay? And Congress said, well, okay, I guess we have to do that because you're rich. No, that's not the way it happened. They sent their lobbyists up the Hill to bribe and cajole your congressman to pass laws which benefited them. I mean, let's just take a look at subsidies. The tobacco subsidies, paying tobacco farmers millions of dollars a year to grow a product that kills when used as directed. 7 million people dead each year. And the government is paying the tobacco farmers to do this. And then turning around and spending millions of dollars on anti-smoking campaigns. We agree with you on that. Conservatives believe in free market capitalism. If your business is not, your product, your service is not good enough for the public to buy on their own, if it's not good enough to stand on its own, you are not entitled to be propped up by the government. You need to find another line of work. Well, we could go through example after example, but I'll tell you what, if you still don't believe me, let's do another thought experiment. This time you're in charge of this one. I'll give you the scenario. I have just won the biggest lottery in history. $1 billion. And I am one greedy, unprincipled person. Now, I want you to tell me how, using only my money and my greed, I'm going to force you to behave in ways that will benefit me. Go. Okay, it has to be believable, okay? You can't have me building huge, spending my money to build huge transmitters and strategically place them throughout the country and bombard the population with mind control rays, okay? Nothing like that. You can't have me threatening to fire a giant laser at the moon, okay? And you may not, and this is really the point of the whole thing, you may not involve the government. Go. Okay, let me know when you figure that out. We're going to have to move on. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again, and I'll keep saying it until it sinks in. Greed is utterly powerless without government. And if you still don't know the difference between free market capitalism and crony capitalism, for the love of God, please learn it. Your ignorance is not the least bit becoming of you. So if government is the problem, how on earth is the answer more government? But we have to have the government. These people are so rich, they're so powerful. Only the government can fight them. We have to have laws passed that will control their greed. No. Repeal the laws that enabled their greed. Change the practices that enabled and then gave them this undue power. It gets the same result, and yet it returns a little bit more of your freedom. And it returns a little more of the potential for your own prosperity. This is what we don't have in common, is that progressives, liberals, leftists have built up this image in their minds that government is all-seeing, all-knowing, all-powerful. That is a completely and eternally benevolent force and has only everyone's best interest at heart and only does good things for people. What did I just describe? It's not government. That's what leftists seem to believe. And I got to tell you, about 97% of human history disagrees with you. From the Egyptian slaves laboring their entire lives to build one pyramid, to the peasant serfs in medieval Europe slogging through the mud and the muck their entire lives, just trying to eke out a living, to the Jews in the gas chambers in Nazi Germany, to the food riots in Venezuela, to the women getting beheaded in Saudi Arabia. And I got to tell you, the other 3% is mainly these days the United States of America. But even here, we cannot escape the reality that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what is government but the people to whom we hand over our power? So if you want to limit, if you want to keep the government corruption to a minimum, you have to keep the government to a minimum. And that is what conservatism is about. It accomplishes liberal goals better than liberalism. There is no body count from conservatism. We are not Satan. But you know what? Insisting we are sure makes you look better in comparison, doesn't it? I spoke about freedom tonight. It is a huge, gigantic subject. I absolutely did not do it justice tonight. But there is a whole chapter on freedom in this book, Dangerous Subversive Heresies. Jackie, how do you think I did on the chapter on freedom in this book?
A+, man, you guys should read this book. It's amazing. He's taking little bits and pieces, just little tidbits from this book and sharing some of them with you. You'll love it. I do.
There's also a chapter on free market capitalism. There's a chapter on healthcare. They will inform you. They will entertain you. In some cases, they will shock you. And they will keep you turning the pages. If any of the people who've read this book are any indication, when you've turned all those pages, you'll just go right back to the beginning and start turning them over again. It is available on Amazon.com. A revised version is coming soon to Kindle. You can find or share this show at kommsr.com. That is Jackie's.
That would be commsr.com.
Oh, not K-O-M-M?
No, sir.
Not the commissar, huh?
That's right.
commsr.com. That is an abbreviation of Community Service Radio, where you can also see every episode of Community Service Radio. You can find me on Facebook, and I'll even give you my email address, tm.rettallack@gmail.com. And that will wrap it up for episode 11. I hope you come back for episode 12. I hope you bring some friends. I hope you grow to be 100 million strong. But right now, I wish you a good night.